My husband emptied our daughter's college fund to buy a boat, then told her, marry rich or get a job at the mall. She ran to her room crying while he named the boat king of the house. I looked at the new title in his hand and said, that name's not going to age well, because Becca was 17 when her father looked her in the eye and said, marry rich or get a job at the mall. She had just asked him where the money went. The $34,000 we'd been putting away since she was born, $20 here, $50 there, birthday checks from my mother, the tax refund year we didn't take a vacation. She'd seen the account balance that morning. She'd come downstairs with her phone in her hand showing the number, $0, and her face was the kind of confused that hasn't turned to hurt yet. He didn't even look up from the paper he was signing. College is a scam, he said. I put that money somewhere real. I was standing at the kitchen counter and my hands went completely still. I didn't drop anything. I just stopped moving. Becca looked at me and I had nothing. I didn't know. He'd had access to that account since we opened it, his name on it too because we were married and that's what you did, and I had not checked it in 4 months because I trusted him the way you trust someone you've slept next to for 19 years. She went upstairs. I heard her door close, not slam, just close, which was somehow worse. His name is Philip. No, I'm not using that. His name is Gordo. That's what his friends call him and it's what he calls himself and it fits him perfectly. Gordo, 51, who had been talking about buying a boat for 3 years while I'd been working double shifts at the radiology clinic to cover the mortgage gap after his contracting business went soft. He slid the paper across the counter to me. It was a title. A boat title. 32-foot Regal Bowrider, purchased 9 days ago, registered in his name. At the bottom, in the line for the vessel name, he'd written it himself in block letters before the notarization. King of the house. I picked it up and read it twice. My chest felt like something was sitting on it. That name's not going to age well, I said. He laughed. Actually laughed. That's the first funny thing you've said in years. His friend Tuck was sitting at our kitchen table. He'd been there the whole time, watching, drinking one of our beers. Tuck, who co-signed the loan because Gordo's credit had 2 collections on it. Tuck, who thought this was all very funny, who said, she's not wrong, the name's bold, and then laughed too, because that's what Tuck does, he laughs at whatever Gordo laughs at, has done it for 15 years, will apparently do it while a teenager cries upstairs over her future. I set the title back down on the counter. I looked at the notary stamp in the corner. The date. 9 days ago. Becca's account had been zeroed out on the same date. I checked my phone right there while Gordo was talking about horsepower. Same date. Same bank. 1 withdrawal, 1 purchase, same morning. He'd planned it. He hadn't stumbled into this. He'd gone to the bank, taken her money, driven to the marina, and come home for dinner like nothing happened. I folded the title once and put it in the pocket of my cardigan. Hey, Gordo said. That's mine. I know, I said. I went upstairs to sit with Becca. I had the title in my pocket and my hands weren't shaking anymore. They were very, very still. Becca was still crying when I got to her room. Not loud crying, the quiet kind, where she's got her face turned toward the wall and her shoulders are doing all the work. She's 17. She'd been saving that money since she was 9, birthday checks and summer jobs, and 1 year she gave up a class trip to put $400 in. He took it in one morning and named a boat after himself. I sat on the edge of her bed and didn't say anything for a while. Then I said, I'm going to fix this. She said, how? Not even a question. Just flat. She already knew what he was. I told her I didn't know yet but that she should let me work. She nodded and turned back toward the wall. And I sat there another few minutes with the title pressing against my ribs through the cardigan pocket. I called my sister Ro that night from the car. Gordo was watching something loud in the living room and Tuck had finally gone home and I just drove to the end of the street and sat in the dark. Ro had been through a divorce 4 years ago. Hers was ugly in a different way but she knew the landscape. She gave me one name, Petra Voss, family law, 2 blocks from the county courthouse, doesn't waste time. I had an appointment 3 days later. Petra's office smelled like coffee and old paper. She was small and she wore reading glasses on a chain and she did not seem like someone who lost cases. I put the title on her desk. I put the bank statement showing the $34,000 withdrawal next to it. Same date on both. She looked at them for maybe 12 seconds. He took the full amount, she said. Every dollar. Account reads $0 now. And the child is a minor. 17. She took her glasses off. Was there a separate account structure, a custodial arrangement, anything that kept this legally distinct from marital funds? I said no. He'd talked me out of a $529 3 years ago. Said the fees were a scam. Said we'd just save it ourselves. I let him. That one sat in my chest like a coal, but I kept my voice level. Petra said, so he moved marital funds unilaterally to purchase a titled asset that is currently in his name. With a cosigner. His friend Tuck. She wrote Tuck's name down without me spelling it. Cosigner doesn't own equity, but he's on the loan instrument. That gets interesting. She didn't explain how. She just clicked her pen twice and said, okay. Here's what we do. She filed the divorce petition on a Thursday. Gordo didn't know. I'd been in the house for 2 weeks since that night, same dinners, same bed, same Saturday morning where he drove to the marina and came back smelling like sunscreen and talked about taking her out on the water in spring. Becca should come, he said, pouring coffee. Get some sun. Sure, I said. He didn't notice anything. He never noticed anything. That was the whole problem and also, right then, the whole advantage. Petra filed a motion to freeze and claim the boat as a marital asset pending division. Because the purchase was funded entirely by a single unilateral transfer of joint funds, funds that had been earmarked, however informally, for Becca, she argued the asset was fraudulently removed from the marital estate. The cosigner situation was the part that made Tuck's name relevant. He was on the loan. The loan was now entangled in active divorce proceedings. His liability didn't disappear just because his name wasn't on the title. Petra said, he's going to get a letter. I said, good. Gordo came home one evening about 10 days and looking slightly less comfortable than usual. He'd gotten something in the mail at the marina's address, which he used for boat correspondence because he thought that was a real thing people did. He sat down at the kitchen table, same table where Tuck had laughed while Becca cried, and he said, did you talk to some lawyer? I was cutting an onion. I didn't stop. Why would you ask that? I said. Because I gotta, he stopped. Never mind. I kept cutting. My eyes watered from the onion and I let them. He sat there for a minute and then he said, that boat is mine. I bought it. With what? I said. He didn't answer that. He went to the refrigerator and got a beer and took it to the other room, and I heard the TV go on, and I heard him turn the volume up higher than necessary. The hearing was set for a Tuesday. Petra called me the Friday before and told me to be outside the courthouse at 8:45 a.m. She said Gordo's attorney, he'd finally gotten one, a guy named Cliff who Petra described as adequate, had tried to argue the funds were a personal gift to the marriage and not earmarked assets. How'd that go? I said. The judge asked him to define earmarked and then asked to see the withdrawal slip. I asked if Tuck had responded to his letter yet. He hired someone too, she said. Cheaper than Cliff. He's very unhappy. I said I imagined he was. Sunday night I heard Gordo on the phone in the garage. I wasn't trying to listen but the door was thin. He was talking to Tuck. His voice had a sound I hadn't heard from him before, not angry, not loud. Something smaller than that. Becca was in her room studying. She had a scholarship application due the same week. She hadn't asked me anything else about the money. She'd just started working more hours at the coffee place on Route 9 and hadn't said a word about it, which was worse than if she'd screamed. I stood in the kitchen and listened to Gordo's voice go low and urgent through the door. And I thought about the title sitting in Petra's file folder with the notary stamp and the date and the $34,000 that was now $0. Tuesday was 2 days away. He had no idea what Tuesday looked like yet. Tuesday morning Gordo put on his good shirt. The blue one he wore to his brother's wedding 4 years ago. He was in a good mood. He'd told me the night before that his lawyer had found something, some angle about how the college fund withdrawal had technically been made during a period when he was the sole earner, and that changed the asset classification somehow. Cliff's going to eat this guy alive, he said. I made coffee and didn't answer. The courthouse parking lot was half full by 9. I got there before Gordo. Petra was already inside with a woman named Lynn from her firm, 2 folders, and a laptop. Cliff was there too, standing near the window in the hall doing something on his phone. He looked like a man at the grocery store. Completely relaxed. Gordo walked in at 9:14 with his lawyer, whose name I never learned to pronounce, and Tuck. Tuck. In a courthouse. For a divorce hearing involving a boat he co-signed. He was wearing a Carhartt jacket and he looked confused about why he was there. That part one hadn't told Gordo about. Petra had filed a motion 2 weeks earlier to include the vessel title in the marital asset division on the grounds that the purchase had been funded in part by the liquidation of a jointly held educational savings account. Gordo's lawyer had filed an objection. The judge had scheduled this session to hear arguments. What Gordo didn't know was that Petra had also subpoenaed the loan documents. The ones with Tuck's signature. The session room was small. A long table, 6 chairs, the judge at one end. Not a full courtroom. No gallery. Just us, the lawyers, Tuck sitting in a chair against the wall like he'd been told to wait there, and a clerk with a notepad. Gordo sat down and looked over at me once. He had an expression like he was doing me a favor by showing up. Petra laid her folders open. Let's start with the title, the judge said. Cliff stood up first. He walked through the withdrawal. The date, February 11th. The amount, $34,000. The account, which had been opened in Becca's name with both Gordo's and my signatures on the originating paperwork. He put the withdrawal slip on the table. The funds were removed and applied directly to the vessel purchase within 72 hours, Cliff said. We have the bank transfer record. Gordo leaned over to his lawyer and whispered something. The judge looked at the transfer record. Then at the withdrawal slip. Then at Gordo's lawyer. Counselor? Gordo's lawyer stood up and started the argument about sole earner status and asset classification. He was 2 sentences in when Petra raised her hand. Your Honor, I'd like to address the loan documentation at this point. The judge nodded. Petra pulled out the second folder. She didn't rush. She laid the papers flat, turned them so the judge could read them, and said, the vessel was purchased with a combination of the liquidated educational funds and a co-signed personal loan. The co-signer is present. She looked at Tuck against the wall. He was served last Thursday. Tuck's face went the color of old concrete. Gordo turned around in his chair and looked at Tuck. Full around. And Tuck looked back at him with an expression that was not friendly. You said this was a formality, Tuck said. Not loud. Almost quiet. Tuck, you said I wouldn't even need to be here. Would the parties please? The clerk started. I'm on the loan, Tuck said, and his voice had climbed now, not angry exactly but something tight and high. You told me it was covered. You said the fund money covered it. It partially did, Petra said. Which is exactly the problem. Gordo said, Tuck, stop talking. Tuck stopped talking, but he pushed back from the wall so his chair scraped, and he crossed his arms and stared at the floor and did not look at Gordo again. The judge reviewed the loan document for about 40 seconds. Gordo was very still. His good shirt had a small sweat mark coming through under his left arm. Counselor, the judge said to Gordo's lawyer, your argument about sole earner status. Does that extend to assets purchased with a co-signed loan? A pause. No, Your Honor. Another pause, longer. The educational account was jointly established, the judge said. The funds were unilaterally removed and applied to a purchase that now carries joint liability through a third party. I'm not seeing the classification argument here. Gordo's lawyer said something about intent. The judge said, intent isn't a line item. Gordo turned to look at me then. Really look. And his face was doing something I'd only seen once before, the time he rear-ended someone on the highway and sat in the car for a second before getting out. That suspended moment. That not yet understanding that the thing that just happened is going to cost him. This is, he started. Mr. Gordo, the judge said, and the room went flat quiet. Gordo closed his mouth. Petra requested that the vessel title be transferred as a marital asset subject to division, and that the division reflect the $34,000 sourced from the educational account, which represented the primary equity in the purchase. The judge looked at Gordo's lawyer one more time. Any further argument? Gordo's lawyer shuffled his papers. He said something about an appeal timeline. The judge said, "You can file whatever you'd like. Today I'm granting the motion." The title was in Petra's folder before Gordo had pushed back from the table. He stood up fast, too fast, and his chair caught the edge of the table and everyone looked at him. He was breathing through his nose. His hands were at his sides. "That's my boat," he said. Nobody answered him. "I bought that boat." Petra capped her pen. Cliff closed his laptop. Tuck stood up from the wall and walked out of the room without saying anything to Gordo. Without looking back. The door didn't slam. It just clicked shut and Tuck was gone. Gordo watched the door and then looked at me and said, "You're going to regret this." I picked up my bag and said, "You named it king of the house." I walked out after Tuck. In the hall, I could hear Gordo's voice through the door, still going, still explaining something to his lawyer. The tone had changed. It wasn't the voice from the garage anymore, the low urgent one. It was higher. Faster. A man trying to find a door that isn't there. Petra came out 2 minutes later and handed me a copy of the order. The notary stamp was on page 3. The date was today. I stood in the courthouse hall holding $34,000 worth of paper and thought about Becca at the coffee place on Route 9, working her shift, not asking me anything. She didn't know yet what Tuesday looked like. But she was going to. Gordo called that night. I didn't answer. He called 4 more times before midnight and then sent a text that said, "We can fix this. Call me." I put the phone face down on the kitchen counter and made tea. He came to the house on Thursday. I heard his truck in the driveway and I sat at the kitchen table and waited. He knocked, which he hadn't done in 22 years of living there. I didn't move. He knocked again and then tried the handle and found it locked and said through the door, "Rena. Come on." I drank my tea. He stood on the porch for 11 minutes. I know because I watched the clock on the microwave. Then the truck started and he left. Becca came over Friday evening. She sat across from me at the same table and I showed her the order. She read the whole thing. She didn't say anything for a while. Then she said, "He took all of it." "Yes. And now you have it back. The court assigned it back to your account." Petra filed the supplemental motion Wednesday morning. It posts by the end of the month. She looked at the notary stamp on page 3, the same page I'd looked at in the courthouse hall. Her hands were flat on the table, very still. "He really named it king of the house," she said. "He did." She looked up at me. "What happened to it?" "It's an impound on Route 7. Tuck's name is on the loan. The civil case drags him in as a co-obligor. He has to answer for his share of the debt before any sale can proceed." She was quiet again. Then she said, "Good. Tuck called me on Saturday." I answered because I wanted to hear what he had. "Rena," he said, "I didn't know what he was going to do with that money. I swear to God. You co-signed the loan, Tuck. He told me it was a joint investment. He said you were both. I was in the room when he told Becca to marry Rich or get a job at the mall. You were at his house 3 days later drinking beer in the garage while he named the boat. So." Silence. "My lawyer's already involved," he said. "This is going to cost me." "I know. Rena, don't call me again." I hung up and my hands were steady. I heard from Gordo's sister in October. A short voicemail, careful, like she'd written it out first. She said she hoped Becca and I were doing okay. And that she wanted me to know she thought Gordo had made terrible choices and she was sorry for what he'd put us through. She did not say she'd told him so. She did not say she'd cut him off. She said she hoped we could stay in touch. I didn't call her back. By November, Becca's account had the full $34,000 in it. She texted me a screenshot. No message, just the screenshot. I looked at the balance on my phone screen in the same kitchen where Gordo had stood with that title in his hand, saying the name out loud like it was something to be proud of. I made dinner. I ate it at the table by myself. The house was quiet in a way it hadn't been in years. Not empty. Just quiet. I heard Gordo was renting a room from someone in Delwood. I heard the boat was still an impound because the civil case hadn't resolved and Tuck wouldn't pay his share without a fight and Gordo couldn't cover it alone. I heard he'd told people at the marina that I'd blindsided him, that I'd been planning it for months, that it wasn't fair. He wasn't wrong about the months. Becca called me on a Tuesday in December. She was on her break at the coffee place on Route 9. She said her manager had offered her a shift lead position. She said she was thinking about the spring semester. She said, "I think I'm going to be okay." "I know you are," I said. She was quiet for a second. And then she said, "Mom. What you did. Don't. I just want to say, I know, Becca." She let it go. We talked for another 10 minutes about nothing, about her coworker who kept misstacking the cups, about whether the old car would make it through winter. Normal things. Her voice was normal. After we hung up I sat in the kitchen for a long time. The boat is still sitting in impound on Route 7. The name is still on the side, painted white on blue. King of the house. Costs him $30 a day.